Welcome everyone to the Police and Crime panel taking place on Thursday the 3rd of February. I'm Councillor Joan Nicholson and I'm chairing the panel for today. The meeting is being broadcast through YouTube channel, and before we commence with today's formal business, I'd like to cover some of the housekeeping issues for us all to follow. Could I ask everyone to switch off or make silent their mobile phones? Please keep microphones switched off at all times unless invited to speak by the chair. When invited to speak by the chair, please switch off the microphone nearest to you and introduce yourself. And can I please ask everyone today to stick to our remit and not sway into operational matters, because as we go through the meeting, if we do, we will have to bring us back. Can we move on to the agenda? And item 1 is apologies for absence.
Yes, Chair, apologies have been received from Councillor Savoury from Durham County Council and Councillor Dalston and Jones from Darlington Borough Council, and from the independent co-opted members, apologies have been received from Mr Cook.
Thank you. Can we move on to substitute members?
Yes, Chair, Councillor Cully is substituting for Councillor Jones.
Thank you. Can we move on to item 3, the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of January? Can we all agree these?
Agree.
Thank you, Councillor Boyce. Potts. Can we move on to declarations of interest? No declarations. Thank you. Can we move on to item 5, the PCC proposed precept for 2022-23 and report of the Police and Crime Commissioner? And I'd like to ask Joy to present that.
Thank you, Chair. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to give the background to the recommendation for the precept rise, and then I'm going to hand over to my Chief Financial Officer, Gary Ridley, who will take the panel members through a short presentation. So really, as panel members are aware, Police and Crime Commissioners have the responsibility of setting both the police budget and the police precept. Like other forces, Durham receives its funding from 2 sources: central government grant and local precept. Durham currently receives 71% of its funding from government and 29% from its precept. The government announced the funding settlement for the 2022-23 on the 16th of December, which made provisions for police uplift numbers, increases in national insurance and precept flexibility of up to £10 per year for a Band D property. The ability to raise funding through the local precept is limited by the high proportion of households in the force area that fall into the council tax Band A. This means that a 1% rise in precept does not have the same impact as our neighbouring force, North Yorkshire. For example, for every 1% rise of the precept in Durham, Durham can raise £400,000 and North Yorkshire can raise £800,000, twice as much as Durham. The government has recently announced that they intend to review the police funding formula allocation between forces for future years. Based on our previous reviews, Durham could potentially lose significant sums of grant up to £10 million, putting significant strains on the budget and therefore frontline policing. Before I outline my proposals for 22-23, I would like to thank last year's panel who agreed the 21-22 precept proposals of a £15 increase, a 6.9% rise that took the precept for Band D up to £230, which was still £11 below the national average. To meet the priorities identified by the public through the surveys and the financial challenges such as energy costs, new shift patterns, which means more officers working at night when it's busy, to pay costs following this year's national pay freeze and capital investment in the fleet and buildings, I am proposing a 4.3% increase, which is a 10% rise, which is a third less than last year for a Band D property, which equates to 19 pence more a week. But as the majority of properties in the force area are Band A, they would see a £6.67 rise, equating to 13 pence a week. I recognise that many households are facing financial challenges at the moment, but the public have told me before my election, after my election, and during the precept consultation, they want to see more officers on the streets, antisocial behaviour tackled, improvements to the 101 system, and road safety improved. And this budget will help me deliver these priorities. If the panel agree to the proposed precept today, I will be able to recruit an additional 90 officers during the year, maintain PCSO numbers at 146, recruit up to 12 additional call handlers, and introduce Operation Snap to enable road users to share footage of dangerous drivers. This is good news for residents of County Durham and Darlington. However, unlike some forces, it won't get back to 2010 levels. In fact, we will still be short of 153 officers on the ground compared to 2010. Unlike our neighbours, North Yorkshire, who will end up with an extra 190 officers. So in summary, this budget will help me deliver the people's priorities, increase the number of police officers, keep the council tax precept below the national average and in line with what's been agreed with other parts of the country. Before I hand over to Gary, I would like to put on record my appreciation for all the residents who responded to the precept survey, who took the time to share their views and comments with me. This was the first time the public has been asked to identify thematic areas they wanted to see investment in during the precept consultation, and their feedback will inform the police and crime plan priorities going forward. I'd now like to hand over to Gary, who's going to take us through the PowerPoint presentation that members have got in the packs. Thank you.
Morning, Chair. Chair, is it okay for me to do the presentation here, or would you like me to come to the front? Do members have a preference? Okay, thank you. As Joyce said, I'm Gary Ridley. I'm the Chief Finance Officer for the PCC's office. I just have half a dozen slides to talk to for about 5 or 10 minutes, which is just sort of some context around today's proposal. The proposal is for £10, increase of Band D, 19 pence per week, so the charge will go from 230 to 240. In the current year, the charge is about £240 nationally, therefore we're just over about £10–11 below the average. The four forces who are contiguous to touch upon the geographical boundary of Durham, that's their current year's charge. Northumbria is the lowest in the country. The other three, as you can see, are all above average, and that just gives a little bit of context in terms of where you live and what you pay. That's a specific table, if you can just see that table, colleagues. That's the first column, current year's charge. Middle column, what the £10 rise will look like at every band. And the end column is the first two columns added together, i.e. the new charge. As the PCC outlined, I think just over half, about 52–53% of properties are in Band A, compared to less than 1% in Band H. We are a relatively low tax base organisation, PCC's office, relative to other forces, which is driven by, as I say, the numbers of Band A properties that we have. And that also relates to the local authority and fire and rescue service as well. So deliverables, we are currently out to police officer recruitment as we speak. I think the closing date's Monday. As well as the extra 90 police officers, which we're looking to recruit from starts in June, the first intakes in June. We're also looking to recruit another 70 to replace those who leave. Therefore, we will have an extra 160 new police officers in the coming year. I have to say, I think that is a significant challenge for the force. It's a record level of recruitment. I think it's great that we're getting new and additional officers. However, these are brand new people into the organisation, and it does take a while just for to get them up to speed in terms of what they do. But nonetheless, I think it is good news that we're seeing additional officers on the streets. PCSOs, as of today, I think we have 147. We are very, very slightly above the target of 146. We've agreed that we won't run with any vacancies. I'm conscious quite often in panel meetings over the years we've been asked where's the PCSOs. We have 20 starting in April, and we will look to have another 20 start in October, November, so we can keep a constant number. We are just at the back end of our recruitment of PCSOs. They do undergo a 3-week training course at Meadowfield. Staff, 1,120. We have in excess of about 100 different types of jobs within the force. The biggest chunks of where the staff are is PCSOs. As I've mentioned, we have about 160 staff who work in the force control room, call handlers, dispatchers, and we have in excess of 100 staff who work in our criminal justice unit, who who act as the link, the go-between between police officers and the Crown Prosecution Service in terms of pulling evidence together. So that's the 3 biggest homogenous groups of staff we have. We are out for recruitment now for the additional call handlers. We do have quite a turnover, like every other force, in terms of call handlers, so we are on a pretty much a continuous recruitment cycle for these individuals. And what we'll be doing, as we speak now, we'll just be looking to add another 12 onto the numbers, just to get them in sooner rather than later. It does take a while to recruit to train a call handler, I have to say. It's not just literally put them in on day 1, they can answer the phones. That it does take 2 or 3 months of quite intensive training in terms of learning what they have to do. Operation Snap, this is where members of the public will have the ability to submit dashcam footage into the force control room, where it will be examined by a police officer, where they will decide whether or not it is sufficiently significant to warrant an investigation. We are looking to introduce that later in the calendar year. Additional IT staff. What we are finding in policing locally and nationally, our IT continues to become more complex and more challenging, not just in the nature of the systems that we have, but also the security risks and operational risks that we carry within that part of the business. So we are looking to invest in that. New custody build started on site 2 weeks ago. I visited the site last week, and we'll be having monthly site visits just to make sure everything progresses on time over the next 12, 13, 14 months. New technology, we are looking to invest in additional body-worn cameras that the police officers use. These are devices which are strapped to officers' chests. We are investing in better quality cameras in terms of audio-visual capacity, and also the quality of the photographs they can also take, as well as the videos. And these are very, very effective pieces of technology that our officers use these days. We are also looking to invest in a new IT system within our control room as well, which we do think will help, again, make us more efficient in terms of answering calls. That is a big piece of work. And finally, we are looking to replace about between 60 to 70 police vehicles, which is the normal replacement cycle. However, we are looking to start and move towards an electric fleet for the first time, because we have been given targets around moving to a green fleet by 2030. In terms of the money, the budget, it's balanced for the coming year. I'm pleased to say, however, like most of the police forces and PCC officers around the country, there are going to be deficits in future years. We will try and manage these. I'll come to that in a little moment. Reserves. By 24-25, i.e. 2-year time, that's what we think we're going to have in reserves, about £9.5 million or so. We have what's called a working balance, 6.5 million. That represents about 4.5% of the total budget, and this is something that all public sector organisations maintain a working balance, and we discuss it with our auditors annually in terms of reasonableness. This is very much a rainy day fund. A rainy day fund, we are required to keep them. The PCC also has about £1.7 million in a community safety reserve, and we'll be discussing this over the coming months in terms of how we can spend that and to deliver the priorities as she's set out in her police and crime plan. We have £0.4 million in our collaboration reserves. The two main collaborations that we have is the Regional Organised Crime Unit, led by Northumbria. It's a three-party arrangement with Northumbria, Cleveland and ourselves. And the other collaboration we have relates to the Joint Roads Policing and Special Operations Unit with Cleveland. And we also have £0.9 million revenue and capital grants. They will be used in the following year. This is just effectively a timing issue where we've had effectively early receipt of certain grants which we will be looking to use over the next year or so. An example of that is COVID. Every police force received an advance payment, a grant for COVID to cover force expenditure in relation to how we deal with that, primarily around payment of overtime and surge capacity and prosecution of individuals who don't comply with rules and regulations. So that's the reserves. Final slide, efficiency. Given that the PCC is going to recruit by the first 226 police officers over the last 2 years in the coming financial year, it's really important that we maximise productivity and efficiency of those individuals, and we are working with the Home Office just to make sure we have a mechanism in place just to make sure that these people are as productive as possible, notwithstanding these are brand new recruits, and as I said before, it does take a little time to get them fully effective. We do have a performance monitoring regime that we hold the force to account in terms of efficiency. That gets reported to annually, normally in about April, to the PCC's executive board. I am fortunate enough to be part of a national group which is looking at productivity, which gives us, as is the Durham way, just to be able to influence Home Office thinking on some of these issues. But there is very clearly a high expectation on police forces that we do deliver priority outcomes in terms of addressing what's in the government's beating crime plan with the additional officers and the additional staff that we're getting. That's the presentation, Chair. Thank you for that. Thank you for your patience. More than happy to attempt to answer any questions panel has.
Can I thank you for the presentation? Enjoy. Councillor Boyes.
Thanks, Chair. Just first questions just on a procedural matter. You know, we haven't got any of the established Darlington councillors apart from the substitute Councillor Cully. We haven't got any of the co-opted members. I'm just concerned about the validity of this meeting. This is probably the most important meeting of the year with regards to this panel. And as I say, we've only got one substitute member from Darlington, and we haven't got any of the co-op members. So how valid is it, first of all, before I come on to my question?
Chair, if I may answer that. Councillor Boyes, for the purpose of quoracy, we are quorate today. We do have a Darlington member who is being trained in readiness of this meeting. And just behind you, Mr Dodwell is in attendance.
Oh, sorry, Derek. When did you come in?
Sneaked in.
Did you just sneaked in?
Chair, I was going to, before I ask my own question, I was going to give a sincere apology for being late this morning. I misjudged the traffic. It was a bit weak, but I'll ask a question when you finish with David.
Sorry, I do apologise, and sorry, Derek. You must have been like a cat moving in here because I didn't see you.
Lucy saw me, but you didn't.
Yeah, just with regards to my question, I'm not going to go over a lot of what I've said because I said a lot in the January meeting, but my concern is notwithstanding the fact that it's just 18 pence a week on a band year, it's still an increase in the precept when we've had, as far as I'm concerned, a deterioration in service. And this is an increase on top of people's council tax bills. In fact, they're going to find out today that fuel bills are going to be going up massively, and the cost of living's going up. This is just another increase. Now, people will accept increases if they can see that it's being justified, but I think when we had the panel meeting the other week, we could say that it hasn't been justified because we've seen a deterioration service. Now, if somebody can tell me, I've got three main issues in Easington. One is open drug dealing and selling on the streets. Two, people riding around on off-road bikes 50, 60 mile an hour and not getting challenged and just doing it in impunity. And three, people walking into our co-op just taking things out and knowing they're not going to get challenged, and they're actually sitting outside drinking the beer that they've just pinched from the co-op. Now, this to me is a certain degree of lawlessness. Now, if these proposals are going to mean an improvement in service and taking us back to possibly 2019 and before level of service of the police, I'll wholeheartedly support it. But I'm just concerned, and I'm very frustrated, as are the residents who I serve and represent, that we have seen a major deterioration in police service over the last 2 years. Some of it because of COVID, be fair enough, and I'm pleased when Joy and Gary said that there's going to be an increase in the number of PCSOs, because that's what we need. We need to get those bodies on the streets, people seeing a visible police presence, and people, the bad guys, being frightened of the police again, because we're just not seeing that now. People are just walking around in impunity doing what they want. Anyway, thanks for that, Chair. That's all I've got to say.
Mr Dodwell.
For me to respond to Councillor Boyce. Yeah, and thank you, David, for that. And what I've done, obviously, from what you mentioned in January and also what you raised with the Chief, James has done a piece of work because we talked about the inspection regime has changed, and I know we've had a conversation about that. What we are doing is doing a league table, and Durham's still top of that league table, so it has changed. So we're not comparing like with like, but what I would intend to do, David, is to bring it back to the next panel to highlight how the forces are performing in the new regime compared to Durham. But Durham is still, at the moment, is still out there on top because it's good or outstanding in 9 out of the 12 areas. I think is it that we've, is that right? 9. Yeah, yeah. So, and I think it's taken it down, but I think we need to compare with other forces, because I think one of those things that we've had with an outstanding force, Durham is an outstanding force. I think the HMIC inspection has shown the areas that the constabulary have done. We've talked about since 2010 and currently we lost 400 and odd officers. However, we're still at the top of the league. But there's a lot of work that we need to do. And I think, as Gary pointed out, there's a recruitment drive on. We need everybody we need those police officers to come forward, to get trained, till we can get them out on the streets. But I think what I need to do from a Police and Crime Commissioner point of view is to reassure Councillor Boyce about where the performance of Durham is compared to other areas as well, and how we intend to improve. But the other thing that he mentioned, and again it's in the plan, Councillor Boyce, is around those things that you've mentioned, because that's what the public have identified as well. And if we need to invest in those areas, like we've talked about Operation Endurance, for the off-road bikes, we are working with the county councillors, towns and parish councillors about getting additional resources such as drones to help the long-range cameras, and put the resources in there. This is very much about delivering on what matters to the local public, and also working very closely with members to make sure you can see the difference and delivering of that plan.
Just one point, Joy. I accept if we do an okay compared to other forces, and what I would say is then other forces mustn't be doing particularly well, or that it must just be Easington and Colliery where everything's gone wrong. Because it's in Easington and Colliery I can see a marked deterioration, and you can say that we're doing exceptionally well and we're the best force, or we're in the top 3 forces out the top northern forces. But in my area, we're not seeing that, and there's this sort of divorce between the rhetoric saying, yeah, we're doing exceptionally well, but we're not where I'm represented and serving. So, you know, I think what we need is now some proper community policing. As I say, bodies on the ground. Let's see if we can go forward away from the COVID situation and start seeing major improvements. Because as I say, you can tell me all day that the force is doing well, but it's not doing well in my area.
Thank you, Councillor Boyce. Mr Donegal.
Thank you, Chair. I must applaud the recruitment drive, but can you give some indication of how many people will be withdrawn from frontline duties to carry out the training of these new bodies, and roughly how long, what impact will that have on frontline policing within the county?
Chair, if I can answer that, please. No additional police officers will be withdrawn from frontline to train them. We already have a training team made up of officers and staff. When we recruit a police officer, they are present within a classroom for 3 months, and then after that they go in what we call the tutoring phase, where they are out on patrol with a seasoned police officer for up to another 12 weeks. So overall it takes on average roughly about 6 months before they can become what's called independent patrol status, i.e. they can deploy by themselves and go to pretty much any job. One complicating factor we have, however, these days is if an individual joins us who does not possess a degree, we are obliged to send them to a university for part-time study to give them a degree over 3 years, which unfortunately does increase the abstraction rate when they're not on the streets because they're sitting in a university classroom.
Thanks very much.
Councillor Nichols.
So I think Councillor Hovels was before me.
Thank you. I welcome the extra police that we're going to have, and I think people are quite happy to pay for that as long as they see police within their communities. I am a bit concerned though, because you mentioned the long lane camera, and I've bought one of those for my community, but I'm not sure if it's ever been used as yet. So that raises some questions for me, and I pose that back to you, Joy. And the other thing I think people within the communities want to see, and I know it's difficult to police all the areas because obviously of the resources that's available to everybody, but people within my communities, and I'm talking about small, rural, isolated communities and colliery mining communities, want to see more CCTV to give them that reassurance. You know, I'm talking about particularly like Wheatley Hill Front Street or the Ludgets, where we seem to have high volumes of crime taking place. And the other question I have is, it's within the information that we've received around the quad bikes, and I know you're probably tired of hearing it, and I keep probably giving people e-rake around that particular issue, but it costs the local authority over £100,000 to address some of the damage that's been done, and obviously you can't continue with that. I'd like to know how much from this budget will be spent on addressing that problem, because that's what residents are asking me. How much is being spent in the last budget on this particular crime, because at the end of the day the damage that's being caused is a crime, and how much will be allocated out of this precept to address that particular issue. And I'm very much aware you might not be able to give me that answer now, but I am asking the question. Thank you.
Right, thanks, Councillor Hovels. Appreciate some of those things are really important, and I think where members have invested, and I've been there myself, where we've invested in support and infrastructure or capital items, that it's useful, even the ANPR cameras. I think we should, as a matter of course, feed back to members of what that funding has done, because I think that supports, it's a partnership approach. It's all right given, but it's nice to get back to tell residents how you've spent the money and the impact it's had. So we can take that forward, Councillor Hovels. One of the things that I think a lot of members will be aware, and it's also in the plan, I'm very keen about area-based problem-solving partnership approach to driving down crime and disorder in a local area. And we have been looking via the APs, but I think my thinking is that I'd like to put that down to each of the neighbourhood policing levels, to put that resource down there and encourage members, housing, probation, community voluntary sector to support the neighbourhood areas to do the problem solving at that local area. And that's where everybody can own the problem. We need members around that table because sometimes they're not there to do the problem solving. I've spoke to the chief, and the chief's quite supportive to get the strategic assessments on a quarterly basis to inform that problem solving approach. That way we can look at what the problem is in that locality, and I think that hits on what David was saying as well, because I want David around that table to understand where the issues are, and also to be able to provide the support and input about what needs to happen. So that's going forward, Lucy. I am looking at delivering the plan, but I'm not delivering the plan centrally. I want to push it down to those neighbourhood levels with the inspectors, with the neighbourhood teams, to look at sorting the local problems, because they can deliver my plan, not me up in covering County Durham and Darlington. And I think obviously Gary's had the conversation as well as how this is going to happen. So it's not there yet, but that's where we are hoping to have that input. And the same will be from a Darlington perspective. We'll be putting some funding probably from the partnership, which we've already had that discussions with Councillor Dalston as well. So although it's there, it's just getting probably when we come back to the next panel, there'll be more detail there. But the idea is to push it down to the neighbourhood levels to encourage partnership problem-solving approach.
Back, Commissioner, on the cost around that quad bike issue, I'd be really grateful. Obviously, I know you can't give it here and now, but if we could make that known. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll get back to you, Lucy. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Nichols.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for that very detailed report. Fantastic. A number of different things that I'd like to raise. Firstly, I would like to praise actually the transparency of how this precept has been done. I think it's been absolutely remarkable how wide it's been shared, really, and you sort of you're putting yourself out there really to a lot of unsavoury remarks in the public. You know, as soon as you put something like this on Facebook, you will engage with a lot of people. And I mean, just how transparent it is, even in the notes of this meeting on page 24, we've got comments from residents saying different things, such as happy to support extra police, some people saying really quite unsavoury personal remarks, but I really welcome the transparency of this. I feel I'm very assured, following the independent report into Durham Constabulary, that one of the very good things that Durham Constabulary is, as seen in that independent report, was how well the force spends their money. And I think the public would really welcome that, particularly at a time when, over the last decade we've seen continuous cuts to the policing from central government, and you don't shy away from that. You say that that's not going to get us up to the same figures that we had prior to 2010. I also welcome the specific examples of ways in which the precept will help tackle crime on the ground. For example, body-worn cameras, particularly with the Crime Prosecution Service. A lot of things obviously don't go to court because of lack of evidence, and I think that will definitely help, as well as the call handlers. My question really is, how much of the allocated precept will be spent in tackling violence against women? I was really happy to see a front page, well, not happy obviously, but I welcome very much seeing a front page spread of yourself down in Parliament talking about this issue, describing spiking as a drop in the ocean in terms of the number of actual reports. So how will the precept be used to further tackle this, or is it a case of more importantly highlighting the issue to start with? Thank you.
Chair, I'll answer that if I can. Frontline police officers, 30 to 40% of their time is dealt with domestic abuse in all of its various guises, and that is associated with violence against women and girls. it's hard to put a precise cost on the cost of the force, what it spends on violence against women and girls, but it runs through everything that it does. PCS tools deal with it, staff deal with it, support staff deal with it, call handlers deal with it. Clearly, body-worn cameras is an example of how you can capture some of the consequences of that. So it's a kind of a golden thread which is runs through everything that the force does, because it is such an important issue, made more impactful by the fact it's clearly signposted as a priority within the police and crime plan. Happy to have the separate conversation offline if that would help about it.
Yes, thank you very much. I very much welcome that. Thank you.
Thank you for the comments and also for the questions, Councillor Nichols. Just on the violence against women and girls is an important issue, and as you might have seen on Facebook, we've got a public accountability meeting coming up. So urge members of the panel to really promote that, to get the questions in, so we can put the questions to the force as well and hold them to account. We've mentioned in previous meetings, and hopefully it'll be the next meeting that we come to, that we can bring the champions, to introduce the champions. We have got a domestic abuse and survivors champion who's looking at the lived experience of those women and girls that we can bring to the panel, and we need to have their voices to inform what we do and hold our decision making. So I can reassure you that when we're developing the strategy, the violence against women and girls strategy, and then that strategy will need to be costed out, and that's where we'll obviously work together to look at where we put that money to make sure it has the biggest impact.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Thank you.
Councillor Potts.
Councillor Potts, Evenwood Division. Yeah, just a couple of things that I've noticed in the proposal and obviously information I've dug up. Just some of the facts. The raise proposed by the Commissioner is the absolute maximum she's allowed to request without a referendum. So she could be requesting less than the 4.odd%, in fact down to 0%. The government grant itself has increased from 100.1 million up to 106.1 million, increase of nearly £6 million, or 5.7%, which I believe is one of the highest increases Durham Constabulary's ever had, or in the top league. This is on top of also £2.5 million in grants it's received from the Ministry of Justice in the last 12 months. In the past 4 years, the Commissioner's Office have raised the precept by 7.1%, 13.24%, 4.86% and then 6.97%, a total of 32.17%, while the cost of living has risen by only 6.7%, according to CPI. By raising the precept again by the maximum allowed, the Commissioner states it will allow officer numbers to increase by 90, which I believe has already been covered within the government grant itself, and maintain 146 PCSOs, which obviously we already have. It will also allow us to recruit additional call handlers, which I think we all probably agree is needed within Durham Constabulary, especially after the Chief Constable admitted last week that we have a nearly 11% abandonment rate on telephone calls made to the police. What isn't in there is also the other things which we're also going to need to pay for. That includes a new Deputy Commissioner, a Victims Champion, an Antisocial Behaviour Champion, a Domestic Abuse Champion, and this week has been an advertisement out for a Safer Streets Coordinator, all of which funding could be used for extra police officers. I think we all need to be aware of the cost of the rising cost of living for our constituents, and at a time where some are making the decision between heating or eating, I think it's frankly wrong of the Commissioner to automatically increase the precept again by the maximum allowed, especially as the precept has already been increased by over 32% over the last 4 years. Can I suggest instead we get rid of the custody suite, which is going to cost £21 million, use £5 million of that to improve the 4 current custody suites, and that will give us £16 million to stop precept rises for the foreseeable future. Obviously, for these reasons, I'm going to be voting against the increase in the precept.
Can I hand over to Gary first for around the previous, the precept and rises over the previous years, and then I'll cover the other areas after Gary's spoken. Thank you.
Yes, Chair, thank you, Councillor Potts. There's a lot that I think it's fair to say you've covered a lot of ground there. I don't necessarily disagree with the figures. I think they're quite accurate, I would say, probably. In relation to precept, of pretty much every PCC is set in the precept levels this week by other panels. I'm not aware, there's 42 PCCs and mayors who are setting precepts now as we speak. I've got results back from about 34 of them, and every one of them is putting it up by the maximum, either £10 or £9.99. You're right around the increase in the last few years. It's gone up in excess of 30%. Previous PCCs have put it up by the maximum. When the government, the Home Office, sets its funding policy for the police, it effectively assumes that PCCs put it up by the maximum. That's very much all the information that we get out. In relation to the grant increase, yeah, that's part of the share, the £550 million. What's not in there are future capital costs. So, for instance, we're getting 226 extra police officers, but what will happen there, we'll need more cars. That's a simple matter of fact, so we're not really getting money to cover that in future. In relation to custody, unfortunately we can't turn back the clock because the contract is now signed. It's a legally enforceable contract. Part of the due diligence that we did in custody was that we physically can't make the existing suites Home Office compliant in terms of the various rules that we have. Having said that, I'd be more than happy just to facilitate a visit to any of the existing sites if you would like, and we can get the custody sergeants, not me, they're the experts, just to talk through just some of the challenges that we face there. At that point, I'll hand it to the PCC. Thanks.
Thanks, Gary. And just on the custody suites, and I know Councillor Potts had previous sort of in the force experience of that. But as PCC, what I did straight away, I went around all the custody suites. I spoke to all the custody sergeants and all the custody officers that were on duty. I've never met one that didn't support the new custody suite and the investigative hub, because things, I think there's a lot of changes happened. The inspections changed. A lot of the people, the detainees are presenting, have got a lot of serious mental health issues, that there's a risk within the custody. And I think the proposals that we've got is not just about saving money, it's about working with our custody suite and our custody staff to give it the best environment, not just only for the staff but also the detainees. So I think we've got it on record. We can agree to disagree, but I would also urge Councillor Post to speak to those custody sergeants and custody officers, because their views have informed my decisions about what's right for Durham Constabulary. In relation to the victims, the antisocial behaviour champion, the victims champion, and also the domestic abuse and survivors champion, it's actually been agreed by the panel. It's in the strategy to deliver, and that's what I'm about. We've got 2.5 years left to deliver the plan, and the panel signed it off and agreed that these were things that we needed to do to do that. So I'm happy to support that. The Safer Streets Coordinator, sometimes it can be misleading because this is grant funded. We've got grant. Thankfully, we have got a really professional office that when opportunities come in to bring funding to the Durham Constabulary area to make our streets safer, that we have to deliver that. And part of it, if we do get significant amounts of money, we have to import, to have an opportunity to have a person who's going to deliver that at a local level. So it's not a forever role, it's a very time-limited role. And it's very important that this is a key area for making our streets safe. And so that aspect that it's coming out of a budget that's a grant-funded budget. So it can be misleading when you see these things. And even the Domestic Violence and Survivors Champion is actually grant funded as well. So although it's coming as part of our staff, sometimes it can be that this money's coming from central funding.
Thank you for that. Councillor Cully.
Thank you, Chair. You may well know what I'm going to say, because I've asked it at every single Darlington Council meeting. I started asking Ron Hogg the same question. Can can you sort out a phone that they can use at Cockerton Station so that they can get onto WhatsApp? There are WhatsApp groups in the town, and the police are not allowed to go onto those WhatsApp groups because of the some kind of, I don't know, there's a reason.
Councillor, can I just remind that's an operational
Yeah, okay, that's not my actual question. I just thought I'd use this forum to ask it, because the why you can't get a phone, a burner phone, is beyond me, so that they can follow in real time what's going on the ground when the PCSOs. But my question is, without this precept, will there not be the police officers that you have put on that screen today? Will there not be the additional police officers not be employed if the precept isn't put up? Thank you.
Chair, happy to answer those. Thank you, Councillor Kelly. On the first point, I'll get back to you. I'll find out. I wasn't aware of that as being an issue, to be honest. In relation to the precept, it's £1.6 million that's being requested. I think what we would do, we would probably look to recruit the additional officers, but what would be in jeopardy is the continuous recruitment of PCSOs and the call handlers and the investment in technology. That's what this is paying for.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr Dodwell.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Can I formally have minuted the dissent from the view with regard to the criticism of the precept? One of the biggest mistakes I ever made as a manager was post 9/11 freezing charges for 12 months. It took something like 5 or 6 years following that of constant criticism from my customers that the prices had gone up. They very quickly forgot that we'd froze the thing because of the problems they had, and it took years to get back to where we started from. So please go ahead with your precept increase, because it's critical that you keep moving forward.
Can I just come back? Thank you, Mr Dodwell. And I think what Gary had on those slides exactly demonstrates that point. I don't know, how long did Northumbria freeze theirs for, Gary?
I think Northumbria froze their precept for 5 years in a row. What that means in practice is they've got the lowest precept in the country, which means that they're more reliant upon government grant than any other force, which does lead to a bit of a more tricky financial position for them relative to other forces who have a higher income base from council tax, such as what the PCC mentioned in terms of North Yorkshire.
Yeah, and I think that sort of reflects some of those challenges, that once it's in the base, it continues and it grows. I think we've got some significant challenges. There's a lot of unknowns out there as well at the moment. We've talked about the potential change of the fair funding grant, where we could be, £10 million worth off. So for Durham, when I've mentioned earlier on the comparison between our neighbours North Yorkshire and County Durham, it's really important that we support the front line and we deliver what matters to the public. And as Police and Crime Commissioner, that's my job, is to deliver what matters to the public. The public have told me what the priorities are, and I intend to deliver it through the precept. Thank you.
Councillor Hovels.
I think the recommendation is quite clear. There's four things that we have to agree this morning. I would formally move the recommendation, Chair.
Sorry, can I thank Joy and Gary for their presentation, and can I thank councillors for the questions. I'd like to hand over to Camilla to explain the process.
Thank you, Chair. Just before we do move on, and noting that Councillor Hovels has moved that, the recommendation today is to note the current position of the consultation and the outcome, to consider the proposal for the £10 precept increase of Band D, and to decide whether to veto the PCC's proposal and produce a report. I just want to quickly run you through the voting procedure in respect of the veto, should you be minded to do that today. The panel do have a power to veto the first proposal of the precept presented by the PCC. That veto can only be exercised if there are 8 or more members in support of a veto. Today we have 8 members, so should the panel wish to veto, all members present would have to exercise that veto. In the event that there are fewer than 8, the proposals will be accepted and the panel will produce a report for the PCC and the precept will be published. That is the procedural points that I just wanted to cover with you today. I'll take any questions before you move to a seconder on that, Chair.
Are there any? Councillor Boyes? Sorry.
No, I'm happy for you to do that, Derek. Just one particular point that Derek brought up, and I've got a lot of respect for what he says, but yes, we can vote to veto the proposals, but the fact that we're still here to question and challenge and discuss the performance of the police force and the Police and Crime Commissioner, whether we sort of veto it or we don't veto it, you know, we're still here to challenge all of that. So just to say we're going to blind faith, sort of support a precept, that's not what we're here for. We're here to challenge.
Councillor Nichols, did you have a mover and seconder? Can we vote in favour of the £10 precept increase at band D? Can you keep your hands up so that Camilla can see them? And those against? That is moved. Sorry, I didn't ask for any abstentions. No, I voted against. Sorry, this is I don't really need this. We move on to item 6, and this is a performance progress report of the Police and Crime Commissioner. And who's taken this one?
Thank you, Chair. I'll take
James,
this.
sorry.
The report really speaks for itself. There is no update since the last panel meeting with regard to the development of quality performance report. I would expect that a first version of the new report, new iteration, will be available for the next panel meeting in March. Thank you. We've also we've put it through the office, and Joy's approved what we've worked on and what that work is going to look like moving forward. And now we're probably at what I would describe as an implementation phase, where we're going to start pushing that out to our work with the force. I'm happy to take any questions that any panel members may have.
Any questions? Can we note the report? Thank you. All agreed. We move on to item 7, the media report. And Steve, thank you.
Yeah, good morning. Details are as given in the report. You'll know that this is a relatively quick succession meeting from the last panel meeting in January, but despite that you'll see that there's been a significant amount of activity, and just a reminder that at the moment we are running very short in relation to our media capacity, but we are employing some external help around that. So from the perspective of continuing to get the Commissioner's message out there, I commend the report to the panel.
Councillor Nichols.
Yeah, thank you. Can I just say in terms of what I said earlier about transparency, I think it's very important what you're doing with the media. I'd like you, to put that on record, how much I appreciate that. I think it gives a a really good. It just shows that you're in touch with the public, and that you're bringing these issues such as violence against women to the forefront. So yeah, I'd like to put that support on record. Thank you.
Councillor Boyes.
Yeah, I'd like to echo what Dan said. Going back to Ron Hogg and then when Steve was interim and when Joy's here, you've never shirked from facing the tough questions, so that's much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we note the report? Thank you. So we move on to item 8, PCC Commissioning Update Report of the Police and Crime Commissioner. Can I ask Charles Oakley to present the report?
Good morning. I'm Charles Oakley, Head of Governance and Finance at the PCC's office. I don't really have much to add to what's in the report. It's a summary of the decisions that were taken to fund projects at the Commissioning Board in December. I'm happy to take any questions that members may have.
Thank you, Charles. Any questions? Councillor Potts.
Just one quick one, just for information really. Who's in the Commissioning Board?
It's chaired by the Police and Crime Commissioner. The Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner is a member, the Chief Executive, the Chief Finance Officer, the Head of Finance and Governance, which is me, the Head of Policy and Commissioning, and 3 policy officers. That's the makeup of the Commissioning Board.
Thanks, Charles. I just kept reading it and wasn't actually sure what it meant. Thank you.
You're welcome.
No more questions. Can we receive the report? Thank you. Can we move on to item 9?
Thank you, Chair. So, in the interim period between the last panel meeting and this panel meeting, the force have had a post-inspection review on their original inspection, the child protection inspection, which was carried out in October 2019. They were reviewed in October 2021, where broad findings were that they mainly improved in the way it protects vulnerable children, and the force that had made positive changes, specifically, as is noted in the report, around dealing with registered sex offenders, the control room response to incidents involving children, which is things like your Thrive process, and dealing with cases where children are reported missing. HMIC did highlight some areas for improvement, notably around children at risk of online sexual exploitation, detention of children in police custody, and the force not having enough accredited office investigators in specialist safeguarding teams to compete with the demand. But it is worth noting that is a national issue as well. It's not specific to Durham. From the PCC's view, I think it's about saying, we recognise that the force have worked systematically to address the issues that have been raised by the original inspection and the things that have been raised in the post-inspection review. However, it is of concern that the processes around safeguarding children at risk of online sexual exploitation do need to be followed a little bit more consistently. But we do recognise that the force are working in that space. And we are assured that there's clear evidence that the force have plans to address the areas for improvement in a targeted manner through a series of different multi-agency work and things like MATAC, which is multi-agency tasking and coordination, and through internal vulnerability groups to deal with the issue at hand. So I'm happy to take any questions that members may have.
Any questions? Councillor Boyes, then Councillor Hoddles.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for that report. Just in terms of sex offenders and on the register, I know there's different degrees of sex offenders and some have to report back to the police more frequently than the others. I'm just wondering if that's been updated over the last few years. And the second question is, we've got a lot of families coming in from other areas. Will any children who's at risk be coming to the radar of the police and the PCC office at all?
So in terms of the first one, I think with regard to the sex offenders register, the force were found to be extremely compliant with how they engage with that. It's called Visor, if I'm not mistaken. There were some things that were highlighted, but were very, very specific, very sort of processy, administrative things that they could improve on. But in terms of their actual engagement and how they interact with Visor is very, very positive. I don't know if the second one, I don't know if Gary wants to, did you want to take that or?
Thank you. No, unfortunately, I didn't have the answer to that, Councillor Boyes, but we'll put it on the list and get back to you. Yeah, because I suspect it's a combination of social services, please. Yeah.
Councillor Holmes.
Yeah, we absolutely can do that. Absolutely no problem, Councillor Hovels.
Councillor Potts.
Yeah, I was obviously quite surprised that the report actually wasn't attached to the notes. So I went through on the internet yesterday and I had to drag through the actual report itself. So this isn't the Peel report, the inspection that was done on the last meeting, where we found out we were 4 times more likely to have domestic violence repeat victims, and it isn't the ICSA report that was on the news yesterday with regards to the sexual exploitation of children. This is actually the National Child Protection Inspection, which was initially carried out in October 2019, I believe, and then reviewed in October 2021. When you go through the report, actually, it's quite shocking to read some of the comments that are made by the Inspectorate, especially having not been given a copy of the report initially ourselves. They've made comments like, "We are concerned about the Constabulary's response to children at risk of online sexual exploitation." That isn't mentioned in this report at all, or the summary we've been given. It reviewed 20 domestic abuse incidents scheduled for diary appointment. The appropriate response in 16 cases happened, but in the 4 remaining, all of which involved children, the final deployment decision was driven by demand and not risk. That means actually police weren't deployed straight away, it was put on the diary. The recording and supervision of investigating is inconsistent. We remain concerned about the sharing of information when children are identified as being at risk on online child sexual abuse and exploitation cases. The National Child Abuse Image Database isn't being used efficiently, and of the 29 child protection cases that they actually audited, the force's response in 9 was good, in 16 they required improvement, and in 4 it was absolutely inadequate. Obviously, that's quite a shocking thing to read on a report, and that isn't mentioned in the summary whatsoever that's been given to us as a panel. Again, like I asked last time on the Peel report, I would ask, why is nobody being held accountable for this? And instead of actually just noting the report, can we have an independent investigation into actually what's gone on there, or an investigation by your office reporting back to us to say exactly what's going on with regards to this report?
Steve.
So just in relation to HMIC FRS inspection reports, it places responsibility on the Police and Crime Commissioner once the report has been made to ensure that the actions that the force have agreed with HMIC are carried through. That is the role of the Commissioner in relation to HMIC FRS reports. You're right in terms of all of the detail, and of course we could make the agendas for Police and Crime Panel meetings a forest of paper, which is why we summarise in the way that we have. But the responsibility for the Police and Crime Commissioner around HMIC, the force has a responsibility to respond to the HMIC reports. The Commissioner has a responsibility to ensure that that response is appropriate. I just wanted to clarify that position. A lot of the things in which Councillor Potts you raise there are operational matters for the force as opposed to for the Commissioner.
Yeah, can I just respond to that? I understand that, Steve, with regards to what you're saying. However, it's our job as the panel to hold the Crime Commissioner to account for her role. Her role is to hold the Chief Constable to account for what is going wrong in the force. I understand that's operational, but it's the Police and Crime Commissioner's job to hold the Chief Constable to account. When you get a report which openly shows that there's child sexual exploitation of children in our county, and we're getting a summary which doesn't mention a lot of the things that I've mentioned, then I think that needs to be resolved in some way or another, or it needs to be reporting back to the panel.
I don't want to put words into the Commissioner's mouth, but of course that is what the Commissioner will be doing with regards to that, to the comments from HMIC.
Can I just say as well, we also have accountability meetings and executive meetings where we pick these the findings in the report. We raise them directly with the Chief Constable, and with James's support, we make sure that the recommendations and findings within the report are being addressed, and we do hold the Chief Constable to account. So when we bring the sort of the summary papers, there has been a few inspections, and it does get they have had a lot recently, but some of them are historical as well. And as you've seen within the plan, the child sexual exploitation of the safer online and issues around violence against women and girls is being addressed. And when we come back to the next panel, you will see the performance framework and how we measuring and holding the chief to account by sometimes when inspection reports come in, what we do with them. And I think that will be sort of quite illuminating to panel members to see how these reports are picked up and to give that reassurance that they're being addressed.
If I could just add one extra thing there around the summary report, Councillor Potts, is that having had the conversation with the HMIC lead liaison officer in the force, we've mentioned three things there that are probably those areas for improvement, the most sort of prominent ones in the force's mind, which probably cover the most ground. I appreciate what you're saying around the detail of the report. However, that is what is mentioned there around children at risk of online sexual exploitation, detention of children in police custody, and not enough accredited investigators. So what I've tried to do there is I've tried to find a balance between, you know, as Steve said, reading out pages and pages worth of stuff, but also trying to cover as much ground in a most efficient manner as possible. Thank you.
Yeah, can I just say I appreciate that, but there's some things that shouldn't be summarised down. You know, when you look in the last couple of reports that we've had, I mean, last time I pointed out that you're 4 times more likely to be a victim of repeat domestic violence in County Durham. I was told, well, it was basically because we're really good at recording crime with regards to that. You know, I then went off. Obviously, I'm an ex-police sergeant in Durham, and I know that isn't the case operationally, that we're absolutely great. You know, so I thought, well, I'll go off and do some checks, and it actually says the last HMIC inspection into crime data integrity, so when they came and inspected Durham, which was in February 2018, they stated over 4,700 reports of crime a year and not recorded in Durham. So we're saying that we're doing, you know, our figures are so high because we're really good at recording things, but then actually when you check, you find out following a HMIC inspection, it turns out we're not. You know, we've got this investigation where it turns around and says children are being sexually exploited. There's other bits and bobs going on in County Durham. Nobody seems to be held accountable. We've all seen the news this week where ICSA, the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse, released its report, and it's saying it's in County Durham. Harrowing testimony.
Councillor Potts, just through the chair, if we can keep matters to questions. Sorry to stop you on your floor there. Matters of questions rather than discussion across the floor, and questions through the chair, please.
Okay, sorry, it just seems like nobody is being held accountable. It's all right having discussions, but what we want to see is people to be held accountable for what's happening to the children in County Durham. And what we would like to see is hopefully some action taken where a report comes back to us to say why these things have happened to the children, why the sexual exploitation has been allowed to happen, although in effect the force is declaring itself as being outstanding.
Councillor Boyes.
Yeah, I think I agree with Councillor Potts, and I accept what Steve said, that we're not going to get too involved with operational matters, but if we're getting a report that bears no resemblance to the report, the actual inspection report itself, and I'd like to thank Councillor Potts for his forensic uncovering of these sort of things, because it helps us as a panel. But, you know, I said earlier on, we're not shirking the difficult questions, but if we're getting a report that's doesn't bear any resemblance to the report that actually came to the force, well then it's doing us a disservice as a panel, to be perfectly honest. So I thank Councillor Potts for his research that he's done on behalf of us. Thank you.
Steve?
So, I'm certainly going to take away from this that in future, in relation to any reports around HMIC FRS, which, by the way, are, as you found, Councillor Potts, the responsibility of HMIC FRS to publish, and of course they are published and are publicly accessible. However, if the panel would find it useful in future, attached to the HMIC FRS reports from the office, we'll attach the full documentation as well. I have no issue with that at all. I, as Chief Executive, certainly am content with the work that my office does in trying to summarise what are huge and complex issues, sometimes discussed in HMIC reports, to try and make it digestible for the panel, to help them in their role in holding the police and crime commissioners to account. But I certainly take away that in future we can provide the full documentation to make it easy for the panel to have a reference. No problem at all.
Thank you. Can I thank everyone for the conversation? We are asked to note the report. Agreed? Move on to item 10, complaints update, report of the monitoring officer and clerk to the police and crime panel.
Excuse me, Chair, can we not ask, I know one of my colleagues actually pointed out that instead of noting the report, we could ask for a further report and an update with regards to that. Can we have that or not?
Sorry, yes, I forgot. Sorry, Lucy, I did forget. Can we ask for an update?
And you'll provide a definition of exactly what it is you're asking for, won't you?
Chair, if I may, just for the purposes, we have recorded it in the minutes, and that will be action through the PCC's office.
Thanks.
Thank you. As members are aware, it hasn't been that long since we had our last meeting, so this report is a standing agenda item on the complaints that have been received between the last meeting and the date of the publication of this report. And today, as at today, there are no reports against the PCC that have been received, and the report is there for panel members to note.
Can I thank Camilla? The recommendation is to note the report. And we move on to item 11, any other business. I haven't been notified of any other business for today's meeting. That concludes the business for the meeting, and before the broadcast ends, I would like to thank those members of the public and media who have watched this meeting, and could members remain seated until the live broadcast ends. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Chair, could I just ask, I just wanted clarity on the vote. I couldn't quite, the numbers weren't declared, and I'd just like the clarity.
Yes, Chair, if you wouldn't mind, that it was 5 against, 3 in favour of the precept. You required 8 in total to veto it, so the precept has been.
Was that 5 against?
5
Against the veto?
Sorry, that was 5.
5 in favour.
Yeah, 5 in favour, 3 against. Sorry.
Well, thank you. Thanks.
Bear with me one moment. Thank you. Just checking the minutes there, it was 6 and 2. The chair hadn't been included in that calculation. Thank you.
6 for and 2 against. Thank you.